Diplomatic moves towards a ceasefire in the Gaza conflict is gathering pace. However, Israel kept up its bombardment of the Strip as rocket fire resumed after a pause on the 11th day of fighting. Rocket attacks on Israel stopped for 8 hours before resuming again against communities near the Israel-Gaza border. Israel continued its airstrikes in Hamas targets, saying it wanted to deter the group from future confrontation. Nearly 230 Palestinians have been killed in the clashes so far, with more than 1,700 wounded in aerial bombardments. In Israel, 12 people have been killed in the attacks, with 336 people being treated for injuries. Now, sources suggest that the two sides have agreed in principle to a ceasefire after help from mediators. Details of the ceasefire are still being negotiated in secret. Meanwhile, a senior Hamas official predicted a ceasefire within days, expecting a truce with Israel, quote, within a day or two.
وقف القتال في قطاع غزة هذا موضوع يدور الآن يعني مع الوسطاء ومع حماس وأنا أعتقد بأنه يعني سيكون الأمر يعني في خلال يوم يومين الله أعلم متى سننجح الوسطاء بالوصول إلى هذه المعاهدة.
Earlier, U.S. President Joe Biden urged Benjamin Netanyahu to seek, quote, a de-escalation. But the Israeli Prime Minister remains defiant, saying the operations will continue until the aim is met.
אני מעריך במיוחד את התמיכה של נשיא ארצות הברית ידידנו ג'ו ביידן בזכות ההגנה העצמית של מדינת ישראל. אני נחוש להמשיך במבצע הזה עד שיושג היעד שלו להחזיר את השקט והביטחון לכם, אזרחי ישראל.
Gaza officials said that the estimated costs of the damage is around $322 million. At least 184 residential towers and houses have been damaged, and 33 media centers have been completely demolished. The amount to a current loss of about $92 million. Additionally, over 1,335 housing units have been demolished as well, while some 13,000 have been partially damaged. Gaza's only coronavirus testing lab has also been damaged in the strikes. According to the United Nations, over 58,000 Palestinians are currently displaced.
بأمان الله لا معنا خبر ولا أي شيء ما سمعنا إلا هالجد وطارت الدار بيلحقوا ولا فكرنا في دورنا إلا هي طلعت في دار جارنا أبو خليل السليم بداوم في الشفهان لا له في شو اسمه ولا إلنا في أي حاجة لا إيش هذا العمل مش عارفين والله إحنا اللي بنطالبه بدناش لا هدنة ولا بدنا نيلة ولا بدنا شيء يا بنموت كلنا يا بنعيش كلنا وخلاص.
Calls for a ceasefire are gaining traction after Biden's comments. German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas has expressed his solidarity with Israel, calling for a ceasefire between two parties, while reiterating that Israel has the right to defend itself. Meanwhile, German Chancellor Angela Merkel backed indirect talks with Hamas, saying they were essential to advancing efforts towards a Middle East ceasefire.
Es gibt das Selbstverteidigungsrecht Israels und dazu stehen wir. Und deshalb ist es auch richtig, dass Israel sich hier an dieser Stelle zur Wehr setzt und auch sehr massiv zur Wehr setzt. Aber auf der anderen Seite wollen wir natürlich auch dazu beitragen, dass diplomatische Versuche unternommen werden, eine längerfristige, nachhaltige Situation dort in der Region herzustellen. Die ist leider über Jahrzehnte nicht hergestellt worden. Das heißt aber nicht, dass man sich nicht weiter darum bemühen muss.
Now, the United Nations General Assembly is meeting over the cross-border fighting between Israel and Hamas. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, told the UN General Assembly that, quote, the fighting must stop immediately. Let's cut across live to that session and take a listen in.
Took to the streets in thousands and even millions to defend freedom and humanity, to say to the Israeli occupation, stop, enough is enough. Some would accuse the United Nations of siding with Palestinians. at a time when it is siding with its charter. It is siding with rights, with the struggle of people to achieve their independence and freedom. The bias which should we fight is any bias that ensures impunity and guarantees impunity to Israel. These wars would never have been launched had the occupation taken responsibility of its different crimes, including oppressing demonstrations and its repeated aggressions in 2009, 2012, and 2014. After long decades of oppression, racial discrimination, and displacement. Mr. President, we call for peace. We are working for peace. However, this cannot come at the expense of our people and its right guaranteed by resolutions of international legitimacy. Ending occupation against our people and our holy sites should be followed by a political process in line with UN terms of reference, with an international sponsorship, which would lead to ending the Israeli occupation of Palestine and its capital. This is what we have informed the US administration and the quartet. After the end of term of the Trump administration and its shameful deal, which pretended that Palestine is no longer a critical and central question. However, the events today reaffirm the importance and centrality of Jerusalem and the Palestinian cause at the regional and international level. But at what expense? Really, at what expense? The occupation targets our people generation after generation. This criminal Israeli occupation has caused so much pain which cannot be solved by a truce and a ceasefire. Susie, a child, went to sleep in her house in Gaza with her mother, father, and 4 siblings. She woke up the next day under the rubble, without a mother, with only one father. Samira and the trees planted by her father in their house's garden in Sheikh Jarrah after the Nakba are still under the threat of forced displacement. Muhammad, who loves running, who loves riding his bike, is today in a prison cell, being deprived of his childhood. Those who want peace have to win for those people. Thank you, Mr. President.
Let's listen in to what UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said just a short while back.
Witnessed a dangerous and horrific surge in deadly violence in the occupied Palestinian territory, particularly Gaza, and in Israel. I am deeply shocked by the continued air and artillery bombardment by the Israeli Defense Forces in Gaza. As of 19 May, this had claimed the lives of at least 208 Palestinians, including 60 children, and injured thousands more. The continued indiscriminate firing of rockets by Hamas and other militant groups towards population centers in Israel, resulting in at least 12 fatalities, including 2 children, and hundreds of injuries, is also unacceptable. My heart goes out today to the victims and their loved ones. The fighting must stop immediately. I appeal to all parties to cease hostilities now. And I reiterate my call on all sides for an immediate ceasefire. The hostilities have caused serious damage to vital civilian infrastructure in Gaza, including roads and electricity lines, contributing to a humanitarian emergency. Crossings into Gaza have been closed and power shortages are affecting water supplies. Hundreds of buildings and homes have been destroyed, damaged, or rendered uninhabitable. Airstrikes have damaged several hospitals, which were already short of supplies due to years of debilitating closures exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. The fighting has left thousands of Palestinians homeless and forced over 50,000 people to leave their homes and seek shelter in UNRWA schools, mosques, and other places with little access to water, food, hygiene, or health services. I was horrified by reports that 9 members of one family were killed in Al-Shati refugee camp. If there is a hell on earth, it is the lives of children in Gaza today. The destruction of media offices and the killing of a journalist in Gaza are extremely concerning. Journalists must be able to carry out their essential work, including in conflict zones, without fear of attack and harassment. They must be protected and respected. I'm deeply distressed by damage to United Nations facilities in Gaza. United Nations premises are inviolable, including during armed conflict. Humanitarian installations must be respected and protected. United Nations agencies and our partners continue to provide aid to the people of Gaza. UNRWA is providing drinking water, sanitation, and electricity generators for those sheltering in its schools, while the World Food Programme has provided electronic vouchers to 74,000 people in Gaza. And the Secretary-General Mark Lowcock and I will launch a full humanitarian appeal for funding as soon as possible. And meanwhile, to meet immediate needs, I'm working on an allocation from the Central Emergency Response Fund, and the Humanitarian Coordinator intends to release $14 million from the Humanitarian Fund for the occupied Palestinian territories. I urge donors to follow through on the pledges they have made. Access for humanitarian goods is paramount. Attacks by militant groups on areas surrounding crossing points are unacceptable. At the same time, Israel has a duty to allow and facilitate rapid and unhindered access for humanitarian aid, including food, fuel, and medical supplies into Gaza. Excellencies, meanwhile, rockets fired by militants in Gaza have reached as far as Tel Aviv and its suburbs and Ben Gurion Airport, claiming civilian lives, causing hundreds of injuries, and damaging residential and commercial property.
Earlier today, we spoke to a former senior IDF military intelligence officer from Tel Aviv, Israel. Here's what he had to say.
Israel will stop fire in the minute which Hamas will stop it. As we speak now, and it's noontime here in Israel on Thursday, for some hours, Hamas stopped their fire, and Israel doesn't fire as well. We don't look for wars with Arabs or Muslims. We look, for peace and to develop our country and our life. The fact that they have a jihad against us, which started already 150 years ago. Sometimes it's a big war. Sometimes it's a middle-sized war, and sometimes it is a small war. It depends on them. They decide how high will the flames be, and Israel tries to lower the flames and to get back to normal life, because we are a normal country. We are not a jihadist country against Arabs or Muslims.